The morning sun had not quite breached the horizon over the affluent suburb of Bondi when the illusion finally shattered. It was not with a bang, but with the sharp, insistent rap of knuckles on a door. For decades, the man inside had lived a life constructed entirely of smoke and mirrors. A fragile architecture of lies held together by charisma and the devastating naivety of those he claimed to love. He knew this moment might come. Swindlers always do. But the narcissism that fueled his empire also blinded him to the inevitability of its collapse. When New South Wales detectives finally moved in, they were not just arresting a man, they were dismantling a ghost. To his victims, he was a genius trader, a confidant, a lover, perhaps even a spy. To the legal system, he was a statistical anomaly of greed. But as the handcuffs clicked shut, the man known as Hamish McLaren looked less like a criminal mastermind and more like a cornered animal, watching $70 million of stolen dreams evaporate into the cool morning air. To understand the magnitude of the devastation Hamish McLaren left in his wake, you have to look past the staggering financial figures and stare directly into the void of his personality. He was a chameleon in the truest, most dangerous sense. He did not just change his clothes or his backstory. He seemed to alter his very molecular structure to become exactly who his target needed him to be. If you were a lonely divorcee seeking stability, he was the bedrock of old-world financial wisdom. If you were an adventurous entrepreneur, he was the daring risk-taker with inside knowledge of the global markets. This adaptability was his weapon, honed over 30 years of deception that spanned continents. From the ski slopes of Canada to the sun-drenched beaches of Sydney's eastern suburbs. Born Hamish Watson, his early life offered few clues to the predator he would become, yet the seeds of entitlement were sown deep. By the time he reached adulthood, the line between truth and fabrication had already blurred. He discovered early on that confidence was a currency far more valuable than gold, and far easier to counterfeit. In the 1990s, he dipped his toes into the waters of fraud in the United States, facing charges that would have ended the career of a lesser criminal. But Hamish was slippery. He reinvented himself, shedding his past like a snake shedding skin, eventually returning to Australia not as a disgraced conman, but as a triumphant worldly financier. It was in the high society circles of Sydney where McLaren truly perfected his craft. He understood that in the world of high finance, perception is reality. He dressed in bespoke suits, drove luxury cars, and frequented the most exclusive restaurants. He did not just act the part, he lived it, funding this lavish lifestyle with the stolen retirement savings of his victims. He presented himself as a highly successful investment advisor, a man who could turn a modest nest egg into a fortune. He claimed to have developed a proprietary trading algorithm, a black box of financial wizardry that could beat the market regardless of economic conditions. It was the classic pitch of the Ponzi schemer: low risk, impossibly high returns, and exclusivity. He made his victims feel special, chosen, lucky to be allowed into his inner circle. One of the most harrowing aspects of McLaren's methodology was his predation on intimacy. He did not just steal money, he stole hearts. He would identify vulnerable women, often successful, intelligent women who happened to be at a crossroads in their lives, and he would love bomb them. He overwhelmed them with attention, gifts, and promises of a shared future. He moved quickly, entangling his life with theirs until the boundaries were erased. Once the trust was absolute, the pitch would come. It was never aggressive. It was always framed as a favor. "I can help you grow your savings," he would whisper. "I can secure our future." And because they loved him, because they believed he was the man he pretended to be, they handed over everything. Take the case of Tracy Hall, a vibrant, intelligent woman who fell for McLaren's charm. To her, he was the perfect partner. He integrated himself into her family, playing the role of the doting stepfather figure to her children. He was generous, attentive, and seemingly wealthy. When he suggested investing her inheritance, it felt like a natural step in building their life together. He showed her spreadsheets, official-looking documents, and falsified bank statements that showed her money growing exponentially. In reality, the money was gone the moment it left her account, funneled into McLaren's insatiable spending habits, or used to pay off earlier investors in a classic Ponzi rotation. The betrayal was not just financial, it was existential. When the truth finally came out, Tracy did not just lose her money, she lost her history, her trust, and her sense of reality. She had to reconcile the fact that the man she slept beside, the man who ate dinner with her children, was a phantom. But McLaren did not limit himself to romantic partners. He was an equal opportunity predator, He targeted friends, acquaintances, and even the elderly parents of his lovers. He had no moral flaw. In one particularly grotesque chapter of his career, he swindled a fashion designer out of millions, decimating his business and his spirit. He looked people in the eye, people who considered him a close friend, and lied with a physiological calmness that baffled psychologists. There were no sweaty palms, no shifting eyes. He possessed a sociopathic level of composure. He could attend a family barbecue, flip steaks on the grill, and laugh with a man whose life savings he had transferred to a Cayman Islands account an hour prior. The scope of his deception was bolstered by his audacity. He claimed connections to powerful entities, dropping hints about work with intelligence agencies or shadowy banking cartels. These lies served a dual purpose. They explained his erratic behavior and occasional disappearances, and they discouraged victims from asking too many questions. Who questions a man who implies he is working for ASIO or the CIA? This narrative of the secret agent or high-level operative is a common trope among career conmen, but McLaren wielded it with specific potency. He used the glamour of espionage to mask the banality of his theft. As the years rolled on, the sums grew larger. The estimates of his total theft vary, but forensic accountants and investigators believe the figure hovers around the $70 million mark over the course of his lifetime. That is $70 million of real wealth extracted from the economy and incinerated on high-end rentals, first-class travel, and the maintenance of an illusion. Yet, like all Ponzi schemes, the mathematics were destined to fail. You can only rob Peter to pay Paul for so long before Peter runs out of money and Paul starts asking questions. The cracks began to show in the mid-2010s. Returns were delayed. Excuses became more elaborate. Banking errors, frozen assets, due to international regulations, security audits. The vocabulary of the stall is universal among fraudsters. Victims who pressed him were met with gaslighting. He would feign hurt, acting as though their inquiries were a breach of trust. He would turn the tables, making them feel guilty for doubting him. After everything I have done for you, he would say, weaponizing their relationship to buy himself more time. But the pressure was mounting. The Australian Securities and Investments Commission (ASIC) began to take notice. The murmurs in the eastern suburbs grew into a chorus of suspicion. It was the tenacity of his victims, refusing to go quietly into the night, that eventually tightened the net. They began to compare notes. They realized that the proprietary trading system was a fiction. The shares he claimed to buy did not exist. The profit statements were created in Microsoft Word. The facade was crumbling. When the media got wind of the story, specifically through the investigative work that would later culminate in the podcast Who the Hell is Hamish?, McLaren's cover was blown wide open. He was not a master of the universe. He was Hamish Watson, a serial liar with a rap sheet. The investigation by the New South Wales Police was a complex undertaking. Unraveling the financial knot McLaren had tied required tracing thousands of transactions across dozens of bank accounts in multiple jurisdictions. It was not just about proving the money was gone, it was about proving the intent. McLaren, true to form, did not make it easy. Even as the walls closed in, he continued to spin lies, perhaps believing he could talk his way out of handcuffs, just as he had talked his way into bank accounts. When he was finally brought before the courts, the sheer volume of his deceit was laid bare. The courtroom was filled with the faces of those he had destroyed: former lovers, bankrupt business owners, betrayed friends. They watched as the man who had promised them the world stood in the dock, stripped of his designer suits and his arrogance. The prosecution painted a picture of a man devoid of empathy, a financial vampire who viewed other human beings solely as sources of liquidity. Justice, when it came, was substantial, though many would argue it could never repay the emotional debt. In 2019, Hamish McLaren was sentenced to 16 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 12 years. The judge described his crimes as heartless and noted the profound betrayal of trust involved. For the victims, the sentence was a vindication, but not a cure. The money was largely gone, spent on a lifestyle that vanished the moment the gavel fell. The story of Hamish McLaren is not just a tale of financial crime. It is a dark study of human nature. It exposes the vulnerability inherent in our desire for connection and security. McLaren succeeded not because his victims were foolish, but because they were human. They wanted to believe in the fairy tale he offered. They wanted to believe that their financial worries could be solved by a handsome, confident man who claimed to have all the answers. He held up a mirror to their deepest desires, and while they were gazing at the reflection, he picked their pockets. Today, Hamish McLaren sits in a prison cell, a stark contrast to the jet-setting financier he once pretended to be. The $70 million is a ghost, a number on a charge sheet. But the scars he left on the psyche of his victims remain. His legacy is a trail of wreckage that serves as a brutal reminder. If something looks too good to be true, it almost certainly is. And sometimes, the monster does not hide under the bed. He sits across from you at the dinner table, pouring the wine, smiling that perfect practiced smile, waiting for the moment to strike.